welcome. This is the Antitrust Channel, and I'm Matthew Freeman. The missile attack launched by the US against the Syrian airfield lit the political world on fire. This attack has been interpreted in many different ways, even by Trump's own staff. Throughout Trump's election campaign and prior to it, he was very much against an attack or invasion of Syria. He cited no benefit, and also that the terrorists would eventually take over and it would end up being much worse than an Assad presidency. Despite mixed messages coming from Trump's staff, his latest statements indicate there will be no further military actions against Assad or the Syrian people. There are a few different elements to unpack, but first we'll focus on the attack itself. The claim that the attack was made by Assad is almost certainly false. The chemicals must have belonged to the terrorists. Either the terrorists deliberately used the weapons, or their stockpile was hit by Syrian bombs. The logic and evidence to support that conclusion is fairly simple. Assad had nothing to gain by any such attack and had everything to lose. There was also an attack back in 2013 that was blamed on Assad, but most independent analysis have concluded that that was a false flag. The UN inspectors' report did not identify Assad as the perpetrator, and a recent New York Times article also presented a list of Assad's supposed crimes, but that list omitted the 2013 attack. This is very significant because the story was aggressively covered at the time and Assad had been blamed. There was also a story that ran in the UK Daily Mail back in January of 2013 in which leaked emails showed the Obama administration had planned to make a false flag chemical weapons attack. That article was pulled from the website, but some archived copies have been recovered. There was also a leaked CIA document from the 1980s, which outlined a plan to overthrow the Syrian government and put in a US puppet. That plan was hatched in order that a US-controlled gas and oil pipeline could be run through Syria, and at the same time blocking a Russian plan to run a similar pipeline. So there are many reasons to suspect foul play in this incident, and very few reasons to suspect that Assad gassed his own people. Firstly, the weaponized gas appears to be unsophisticated, probably a simple chlorine derivative called phosgene. It does not appear to be the deadly gas sarin. Images show first responders not wearing protective gear such as gloves. Sarin remains active on the ground and in clothing and would have quickly killed or disabled those who rushed to help. There is no evidence that that occurred. Therefore, the chemical in question was not sarin, perhaps it was phosgene. Phosgene causes choking, which was the reported cause of death. It's much easier to produce than sarin, which implicates terrorists rather than the Syrian state. UN inspectors reported Assad had removed all of his chemical weapons much earlier, including the precursors, that is, the materials required to make them. So, according to the best intelligence available prior to the attack, Assad did not have the chemical weapons required. The strongest argument against Assad being the perpetrator is that everything was going his way. He was winning the war against the terrorists, and the US administration had dismissed regime change as a goal. That was repeated by both Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley. The only thing that could reverse this decision was the use of chemical weapons. There is no motive for Assad's use of chemical weapons. In fact, the use of such weapons was the only thing that could reverse his current good fortune. If Assad used the chemical weapons, then he did the only thing that could cause him to be defeated. This was also the conclusion drawn by the very popular conservative ex-congressman Ron Paul. Regardless of whatever else Assad is, nobody has accused him of being stupid. Therefore, there is basically 0% chance that Assad used chemical weapons against his civilian population. Most people don't know a lot about Assad and the fact that he was elected by an 88% majority with a 73% voter turnout. Even in Western nations, an 88% majority is extremely high. He's a democratically elected leader who enjoys strong support from his people. Yet in the press he is constantly called a dictator. It's notable that Assad has not been charged with using chemical weapons against terrorists, rather only against civilians. The allegation of chemical weapons use is absurd on its face. This takes it to a whole other level of the ridiculous. The story is beyond belief, which can be illustrated with an analogy. Imagine someone breaks into your house, but instead of shooting them, you turn and shoot your family instead. This is the story that we are expected to believe. Like all other political figures that the CIA has decided to overthrow, the press has provided great support. Therefore, Assad has had some very bad press. We're told what a terrible guy he is who has used force against his, quote, own people. However, these violent extremist groups have surrounded him for years. They want to kill him and people in his government. They are terrorists who have been stirred up by foreign agents such as Saudi Arabia. These are the people who cut the heads off children, devour people's organs, rape women, and sell them as slaves. If he has acted forcefully to suppress those violent factions in the past, I find it hard to condemn him. The official Russian explanation for the release of chemicals is that a terrorist cache was hit by Syrian bombs, releasing the chemicals. Some critics of that narrative say the bombs would consume the gas. However, that's false and shows zero knowledge of chemistry or physics. Only incendiaries, that is, firebombs, would burn away the gas. The bombs used were high explosives. Such bombs explode and perhaps consume some nearby oxygen. However, then shrapnel flies away from the explosion. The shrapnel can damage chemical containers, and such bombs do not consume chemical agents, rather they disperse them. So this Russian proposal is a plausible explanation. In fact, reports have come out of Syria that on April 11, US bombs fell on a different ISIS chemical weapons factory and caused the same or similar results. The Syrians claim this proves the terrorists have chemical weapons and that they can be released by a bombing attack. Putin also warned that the missile attack by Trump has emboldened the terrorists and that Russia has intelligence that terrorists are planning more chemical attacks, which they will no doubt blame on Assad. While there may have been some political advantages to Trump's missile attack, those who elected him for his stance on peace have not been encouraged. Those who are cheering loudest, however, are the worst enemies through Trump's campaign. The mainstream media, Hillary Clinton, the neocons such as the detestable McCain and Lindsey Graham, who are warmongers and potentially terrorist collaborators, even ISIS and Al-Qaeda cheered the attacks, which should give people pause for thought. To use a soccer analogy, this was an own goal for Trump, a win for his opponents, and these were the people who applauded loudest. Some of those opposed to Trump at every turn have taken the opportunity to claim that he has failed. However, these are generally Hillary voters, and it's certain that Hillary would have already had tanks rolling into Damascus. Some Trump supporters think that they may be doing him a favour by supporting him right or wrong, but that's misguided. It seems most likely that Trump is being coerced or co-opted by elements in the White House, diverted by those who do not share his vision. It seems he's been pushed from his path. Only the loud voices of his supporters can give him the political cover he needs to push them back, to return to the policies he campaigned on. If they will not stand for what Trump's promised, then it makes it increasingly difficult for Trump to deliver on those promises himself. Some claim this is a chess move by Trump. However, we do notice he's been surrounded by those who are opposed to his stated policies. If it's a chess move, it's headed towards a checkmate. Many of those people he selected himself, such as Nikki Haley, McMaster, Pence, and so forth. In the National Security Council, we see it's been taken over. Bannon is being forced out. K.T. McFarland replaced by Dina Powell, who was involved with Goldman Sachs and one of Dick Cheney's inner circle. So if this is chess, it has involved a lot of sacrifice, but I see no improvements in his position. The attack on Syria occurred one day after Steve Bannon's displacement from the National Security Council. There are also reports of angry confrontations between McMaster and Bannon. It seems unlikely they are not connected. Bannon was the major architect of Trump's policy positions, and we suspect he was violently opposed to the Syrian attack. There are some obvious reasons for making this missile attack on Syria: to improve Trump's poll numbers and to show a willingness to commit to military action. Now, this might give him some diplomatic leverage and perhaps help avert a military encounter with North Korea, but it's highly debatable. If he wished to project strength, he could have waited for a better rationale. The Syrian chemical attack stinks of a false flag, and many of his voting base are sophisticated enough to figure that out. His recent use of the Moab, the biggest non-nuclear bomb in the US arsenal, looks like a better move. The target was a remote location in Afghanistan, and the bomb is very impressive. We were told it was used against ISIS to destroy a cave and tunnel system. It isn't really possible to figure out independently who it did hit, but it wasn't used against a sovereign state, so there are a lot less political problems with its use. Trump made it clear in his campaign that he was going to take the fight to the terrorists, so this action is consistent with his campaign rhetoric. However, many are wondering if any action will be taken against those states which have supported the terrorists. The terrorists are being paid. They're effectively a mercenary army. If the funding dried up for weapons and for salaries, then ISIS would quickly come to an end. The states funding ISIS include Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and Israel. Considering most of these are neutral or allied, then diplomatic pressures might stop the funding. However, another major source of ISIS support is the CIA. So if Trump is serious about ISIS, then he should clean up his own house first. There's been a strong response from some very public pro-Trump figures such as Ann Coulter, Alex Jones, and Michael Savage. We can only hope that the message will get through to Trump and that this will tend to get the Trump train back onto the rails. Anyhow, that's enough for today. If you like the clip, please hit like and subscribe for future installments. You've been tuned in to the Antitrust channel, and you've been listening to Matthew Freeman.